What happens when a prince who has spent years criticizing the media sits down with one of America's most respected journalists, only to have the tables turned on him in the most explosive way imaginable? This is the story of how Prince Harry's appearance on Good Morning America went from a routine promotional interview to a career-defining moment that left viewers speechless and studio executives scrambling. The Duke of Sussex thought he was walking into friendly territory, but what unfolded was a master class in journalism that exposed contradictions, challenged narratives, and ultimately led to one of the most dramatic exits in live television history. Before we dive into this incredible confrontation, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below with your thoughts on celebrity interviews gone wrong. Trust me, you're going to want to discuss this one. The morning started like any other at the Good Morning America studios in Times Square. Robin Roberts, veteran anchor and beloved television personality, had conducted thousands of interviews throughout her illustrious career. She had spoken with presidents, celebrities, and royalty with equal grace and professionalism. But today's guest, Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, represented something different. Here was a man who had voluntarily stepped away from royal duties, relocated to California, and spent considerable time publicly airing grievances about his family and the institution he was born into. As the cameras rolled and the familiar Good Morning America theme played, Robin Roberts welcomed viewers with her trademark warm smile. Good morning, America. I'm Robin Roberts, and we have a very special guest with us today. Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, is here to discuss his latest charitable initiatives and his life in California. Your Royal Highness, thank you for joining us. Prince Harry, dressed in a navy blazer and appearing relaxed, smiled back. Thank you for having me, Robin. Please, just Harry is fine. All right, Harry, Robin said, her tone professional but friendly. Let's start with your work with veterans through the Invictus Games. It's clearly something you're passionate about. Harry's face lit up as he began discussing the foundation he had created for wounded service members. The Invictus Games represents everything I believe in. Robin, these are men and women who have sacrificed so much for their countries, and they deserve our unwavering support. When I see these athletes compete, many of them dealing with invisible wounds like PTSD, it reminds me why this work is so important. Robin nodded thoughtfully. It's beautiful work, and I know our viewers appreciate your dedication to veterans. But Harry, I have to ask, and I think many Americans are curious about this, how do you reconcile your advocacy for privacy and your criticism of media intrusion with your very public media presence? You've written a best-selling memoir. You and Meghan have appeared on major television programs, and you're here with us today. Some might say that seems contradictory. The question hung in the air for a moment. Harry's expression shifted slightly, the easy smile fading just a degree. Robin, I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding about what we've been advocating for. We've never asked for complete privacy. We've asked for the right to control our own narrative and to protect our family from harmful, invasive coverage. That serves no public interest. But Harry, Robin pressed gently, when you speak publicly about private family conversations, when you share intimate details about your relationships with your father and brother, aren't you inviting the very scrutiny you claim to want to avoid? You can't selectively demand privacy while simultaneously choosing what private matters to make public, can you? Harry shifted in his chair, his jaw tightening slightly. I shared those stories because they were my stories to tell. Robin, there's a difference between someone else exploiting your private moments and choosing to share your own truth. Robin's expression remained neutral, but her journalistic instincts were clearly engaged. Your truth, you say. But truth isn't subjective, Harry. Either something happened or it didn't. When you describe conversations with family members who aren't here to respond, when you characterize their actions and motivations, you're not just sharing your truth, you're making claims about other people's truth. Don't they deserve the same consideration you're asking for? The studio felt charged with tension. Harry leaned forward slightly, his voice carrying a note of defensiveness. Robin, I lived those experiences. I was in those rooms. I heard those conversations. Nobody else can speak to my experience except me. Of course, Robin replied smoothly. And I'm not questioning your experience, but you've made very serious allegations, Harry. You've suggested racist conversations took place within your family. You've characterized your father and stepmother in ways that many would consider damaging to their reputations. You've painted a picture of an institution that you claim was unsupportive and even harmful to your wife's mental health. These aren't just personal revelations, they're accusations that affect real people and a centuries-old institution. Shouldn't there be some accountability for those claims? Harry's composure began to crack visibly. Accountability? Robin, where was the accountability when my wife was being torn apart by your industry? Where was the accountability when racist coverage was allowed to continue unchecked? Where was the accountability when my mother was being hounded by photographers? Robin didn't flinch. Harry, I understand your pain about your mother's death, and I think every reasonable person has sympathy for what your family endured. But you're conflating different issues here. The paparazzi behavior that contributed to your mother's death was widely condemned. Media practices have evolved significantly since then. But more importantly, you're using your mother's tragedy to shield yourself from legitimate questions about your own actions and statements. The prince's face reddened. Shield myself. Robin, I've been more transparent about my life than probably any member of my family in history. I've shared my struggles with mental health, my grief, my mistakes. How is that shielding myself? Transparency and accountability aren't the same thing, Harry, Robin responded calmly. Sharing your feelings and experiences is one thing. Making serious accusations about other people while positioning yourself as beyond criticism is another. You've built a brand around being the wronged party, the victim of an unfair system and an unfair media. But when journalists ask you challenging questions about your own contradictions and inconsistencies, you dismiss it as unfair treatment. You can't have it both ways. The interview was clearly veering far from the comfortable promotional territory. Harry had likely expected. His media training was evident as he tried to regain control of the narrative. Robin, I came here to talk about my work with veterans and my charitable initiatives. I'm not sure why we're rehashing old controversies. Instead of focusing on the positive work we're trying to do, Robin smiled, but it was the smile of a seasoned journalist who had just been handed an opening. But Harry, that's exactly my point. You can't separate your public work from your public statements. Your credibility as an advocate, as someone asking people to support your causes and believe in your mission, is directly tied to your honesty and consistency as a public figure. When people see contradictions between what you say and what you do, when they see you making serious accusations without providing evidence, when they see you claiming to want privacy while simultaneously courting publicity, it raises questions about your trustworthiness. Harry's face flushed deeper, and for the first time since the interview began, his carefully maintained composure started to completely unravel. Trustworthiness? Robin, are you seriously questioning my trustworthiness while representing an industry that has made millions off exploiting my family's pain? An industry that drove my mother to her death. Robin remained remarkably calm, her voice steady and professional. Harry, I think you're deflecting again. We're not talking about the entire media industry. We're talking about you, your statements, and your credibility. And frankly, invoking your mother's death every time you're asked a difficult question is becoming a pattern that people are noticing. The words hit like a physical blow. Harry's eyes widened in shock and anger. Excuse me, did you just suggest that I'm exploiting my mother's memory? I'm suggesting that you use it as a shield, Robin replied without hesitation. Every time someone questions your actions, your motivations, or your consistency, you bring up your mother's death as if that makes you immune from criticism. Your mother's death was a tragedy, Harry. No one disputes that, but it doesn't give you a lifetime pass to avoid accountability for your own choices and statements. Harry stood up abruptly from his chair, his hands trembling slightly with rage. This is exactly what I'm talking about. This is exactly the kind of treatment that made us leave. You're twisting everything I say, putting words in my mouth, and then attacking me for defending myself. Robin didn't move from her position, maintaining eye contact. Harry, please sit down. I'm not attacking you. I'm asking you direct questions about public statements you've made. That's what journalists do. If you find those questions uncomfortable, perhaps you should examine why. Don't tell me to sit down, Harry snapped, his voice rising. You don't get to ambush me with gotcha questions and then act like you're just doing your job. This was supposed to be about my charitable work, not some interrogation designed to make me look bad. Robin's expression hardened slightly. Harry, every question I've asked you has been directly related to your public statements and actions. If discussing your own words makes you look bad, that's not my fault or my intention. That's something you need to reflect on. Reflect on what, exactly? Harry demanded, pacing slightly behind his chair. Reflect on the fact that I had the courage to speak my truth. Reflect on the fact that I refused to stay silent while my wife was being destroyed. Reflect on the fact that I chose my family over an institution that didn't care about our well-being. Robin leaned forward slightly in her chair. Reflect on the fact that you've made very serious allegations without providing evidence. Reflect on the fact that you've characterized private conversations in ways that serve your narrative, while the other parties involved have remained dignified and silent. Reflect on the fact that you've positioned yourself as a victim, while simultaneously using your royal title and status to build a lucrative media career. Harry stopped pacing and turned to face her directly, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You have no idea what you're talking about, Robin. You weren't there. You didn't live through what we lived through. You don't get to sit there in your comfortable studio and judge decisions that were made under circumstances you can't possibly understand. You're absolutely right, Robin replied calmly. I wasn't there. Neither were the millions of people you're asking to believe your version of events. That's exactly why evidence matters, Harry. That's exactly why consistency matters. When you make claims about racist conversations, but then refuse to name names or provide specifics, when you describe your family as cold and uncaring while they maintain dignified silence, when you claim to want privacy while participating in tell-all interviews, people have legitimate questions. Harry's hands clenched into fists at his sides. So, now you're calling me a liar? I'm not calling you anything, Harry. I'm pointing out inconsistencies and contradictions that reasonable people have noticed. If you interpret that as calling you a liar, perhaps that says more about your own doubts than it does about my questions. The prince let out a bitter laugh. Unbelievable. This is absolutely unbelievable. You know what, Robin? This is exactly why we had to leave. This is exactly the kind of toxic gotcha journalism that makes people lose faith in your industry. Robin's voice remained steady, but there was steel in it now. Harry, challenging journalism isn't toxic. Holding public figures accountable for their statements isn't gotcha journalism. What's toxic is expecting to be able to make serious accusations, profit from tell-all revelations, and then claim victimhood when people ask you to defend or explain your positions. Profit. Harry's voice cracked with indignation. You think? This has been about profit. You think I wanted any of this? You think I wanted to have to defend my wife against racist attacks? You think I wanted to have to choose between my family and my birth family? Robin stood up now, matching his energy but maintaining her professional demeanor. Harry, I think, you've created a narrative where you're always the victim, where every criticism is an attack, where every question is unfair treatment. But the reality is that you've made choices. You've chosen to write books, give interviews, make documentaries, and build a media presence. Those are business decisions, Harry. They're career moves. And when you make those choices, you open yourself to the same scrutiny that any other public figure faces. Harry's voice became shrill with anger. Business decisions? Career moves? Robin, we were forced into this position. We were cut off financially. We were stripped of our security. We had to find ways to support ourselves and our family. Were you, though? Robin asked pointedly. Because reports suggest that your father continued to provide financial support well after you stepped back from royal duties. Reports suggest that you had significant personal wealth from your mother's inheritance and your own investments. Reports suggest that many of the claims you've made about being cut off have been disputed by palace sources. Harry's face went white with rage. Palace sources? You're going to believe anonymous palace sources over me? Over someone who actually lived through this experience? Robin didn't back down. I'm going to consider all available information, Harry. That's what responsible journalists do. We don't just take one person's word, even if that person is charming or sympathetic or has a compelling story. We look at evidence, we consider multiple perspectives, and we ask hard questions. Hard questions, Harry repeated mockingly. Is that what you call this hit job? Is that what you call deliberately trying to undermine everything I've said and everything I've worked for? Robin's patience finally showed signs of strain. Harry, if your statements can't withstand basic journalistic scrutiny, If your positions fall apart when challenged with follow-up questions, that's not a hit job. That's a revelation about the strength of your arguments. The studio fell silent, except for the low hum of cameras and equipment. Harry stared at Robin for a long moment, his chest rising and falling rapidly. When he spoke again, his voice was cold and controlled. "You know what, Robin? I think we're done here." Robin remained seated, her expression neutral. "We still have 15 minutes left in the segment, Harry." "Not anymore, we don't," Harry replied, reaching for his microphone and beginning to remove it. "I'm not going to sit here and be ambushed by someone who's clearly decided to attack me regardless of what I say." "Harry," Robin said firmly, "no one is attacking you. If you leave now, if you walk out of this interview because you don't like the questions, what message does that send about your willingness to be accountable for your public statements?" Harry paused in removing his microphone, his jaw working. Furiously, what message does it send? It sends the message that I won't tolerate being treated with disrespect. It sends the message that I won't be bullied by journalists who think they can destroy people for entertainment. Robin stood up again, her voice carrying a note of genuine concern. "Harry, I have not disrespected you. I have not bullied you. I have asked you legitimate questions about your own statements and actions. If you can't handle that level of scrutiny, then perhaps you should reconsider putting yourself in the public eye." The challenge in Robin's voice was unmistakable, and it hit Harry like a lightning bolt. His face contorted with fury as he completely abandoned any pretense of royal composure. "Reconsider putting myself in the public eye? Are you kidding me? I was born into this, Robin. I didn't choose to be in the public eye. I was forced into it from the moment I took my first breath." Robin's expression remained steady, but her voice carried a hint of exasperation. "Harry, you weren't forced to write a memoir. You weren't forced to do a Netflix documentary. You weren't forced to give interview after interview. Those were choices you made as an adult. You can't claim you were forced into the public eye and then actively court media attention whenever it serves your purposes. Court media attention?" Harry's voice reached a near shriek. "I'm trying to control my own narrative after decades of having lies told about me and my family. I'm trying to set the record straight after years of being misrepresented by people like you." Robin's demeanor shifted noticeably, her professional mask slipping for the first time. "People like me? Harry, what exactly do you mean by that? Because I'm starting to think this interview has revealed more about your character than any memoir ever could." Harry ripped the microphone from his lapel entirely, the small piece of equipment clattering to the floor. "My character? You want to talk about character? Let's talk about the character of a journalist who invites someone on her show under false pretenses and then proceeds to attack them for 20 minutes straight." Robin's voice rose slightly, matching his energy for the first time. "False pretenses? Harry, you knew you were coming on a news program. You knew you'd be asked about current events and your public statements. What did you think this was going to be? A puff piece where I lobbed you softball questions about your favorite charity? I thought it was going to be a professional interview." "With a respected journalist," Harry shot back, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "I thought I was going to be treated with basic human decency, not subjected to a character assassination designed to make you look tough." Robin stood up abruptly, her own composure finally cracking. "Character assassination? If discussing your own words constitutes character assassination, then perhaps you should examine what those words actually say about you." Harry began pacing again, his movements erratic and agitated. "What they say about me? They say that I had the courage to stand up for my wife when no one else would. They say that I was willing to sacrifice everything for love and family. They say that I refused to be complicit in a system that was destroying the people I care about most. They also say," Robin interrupted sharply, "that you're willing to throw your own family under the bus for money and publicity. They say that you'll make serious accusations without evidence. They say that you'll claim victim status while profiting from your pain. They say that you'll demand privacy while living your entire life in public. That's what your words say about you, Harry." The prince stopped pacing and turned to face her, his eyes blazing with fury. "How dare you? How dare you stand there and lecture me about my family, about my choices, about my life? You know nothing about what I've been through. You know nothing about the impossible position I was put in." Robin's voice became ice cold. "I know what you've chosen to tell the world, Harry. And what you've chosen to tell the world is that you're... That's what I know, because that's what you've said, repeatedly, in multiple forums. Profit. Harry's hands were shaking visibly now, his voice becoming increasingly unhinged. For profit. You think I've enjoyed any of this? You think I've enjoyed having people like you question my every word and motivation? I think, Robin said slowly and deliberately, that you've enjoyed the control. I think you've enjoyed being able to tell your side of the story without challenge, without scrutiny, without anyone being able to respond or defend themselves. I think you've enjoyed playing the victim while cashing the checks. The words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. For a moment, the studio was completely silent, except for the sound of Harry's labored breathing. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the force of a thunderclap. You know what, Robin? You're everything that's wrong with journalism today. You're everything that's wrong with this industry. You're exactly the kind of person who would have hounded my mother to her death, and then acted like you were just doing your job. Robin's face went white with shock and anger. Don't you dare. Don't you dare invoke your mother's death to attack me personally just because you can't handle being asked hard questions. That's beneath contempt, Harry, even for you. Harry's composure, completely shattered, beneath contempt. You want to see beneath contempt? Beneath contempt is sitting there smugly, destroying someone's reputation while pretending to be objective. Beneath contempt is using your platform to bully and intimidate guests who came here in good faith. Good faith. Robin's voice was rising. Again, Harry, you've spent this entire interview deflecting, attacking, and playing victim instead of answering a single question directly. You've accused me of ambushing you, attacking you, bullying you, and now you've compared me to the paparazzi. Who killed your mother? Where exactly is the good faith in any of that? The good faith was in me trying to have an adult conversation about important issues, but clearly you're more interested in creating drama than having meaningful dialogue. Robin's laugh was harsh and bitter. Meaningful dialogue? Harry, you've refused to engage with a single substantive question I've asked. You've turned every inquiry into an attack on your character, every challenge into evidence of media bias, every uncomfortable moment into proof of victimization. That's not dialogue, that's performance art. Harry shrugged on his jacket with violent motions, his face red with rage and humiliation. You know what this is, Robin? This is exactly why. People don't trust the media anymore. Because people like you think you have the right to destroy anyone who doesn't fit your narrative. Robin's voice became dangerously quiet. The only narrative here, Harry, is the one you've created for yourself. And the only person destroying anything is you, destroying what's left of your credibility with every word that comes out of your mouth. My credibility comes from telling the truth about my experiences, not from the approval of journalists who have already made up their minds. Your truth again, Robin said with evident disgust. Harry, truth isn't subjective. Facts aren't personal. Opinions. Reality doesn't bend to accommodate your feelings. And credibility isn't something you can claim. It's something you earn through consistency, honesty, and accountability. All things you've demonstrated a complete inability to handle. Today, Harry's final words were delivered with venom and fury. This interview is over. And frankly, Robin, this has been a perfect demonstration of why my wife and I were right to leave this toxic environment behind. He stormed toward the studio exit, leaving Robin standing alone at the interview set. Her voice followed him, calm and professional, once again. Harry, you're not leaving a toxic environment. You're creating one wherever you go. The studio doors slammed shut behind the prince, leaving Robin Roberts standing in front of the cameras. She looked directly into the camera lens, her professional composure gradually returning. We'll be right back after this break. As the cameras cut away and the studio fell into stunned silence, it was clear that this interview would be remembered not for what Prince Harry had intended to promote, but for what it had revealed about his character, his mindset, and his relationship with accountability. The man who had spent years positioning himself as a victim of media mistreatment had just provided the most compelling evidence yet that perhaps the problem wasn't with the media at all. What did you think of this explosive confrontation? Do you believe Robin Roberts was too harsh in her questioning? Or was Prince Harry's reaction completely out of line? The conversation Around this interview is just getting started, and you won't want to miss what happens next.